This is All India Radio. Power of Listening. Under this series, tonight we take you on a journey to the world of yet another magnificent facet of the traditional Indian knowledge systems. I'm Manoj Mainkar. Ancient Indian Observatories. In today's episode, we shall be focusing on the history of the rich legacy of observatories in ancient India. Stay tuned.
Welcome everybody to this particular episode of Power of Listening. My name is Professor Abhirup Datta. I am a professor in the Department of Astronomy, Astrophysics and Space Engineering here in Indore. And here we are today for a very interesting discussion with one of our senior PhD student in the department, Parul Jangal, who actually is studying very intricate details of in transient radio world, and has a lot of questions regarding traditional astronomy and how all it began and stuff. We thought that maybe it is interesting to discuss these questions and the answers on air, because the answers to these questions may also be relevant for other people, particularly the younger minds in India today. So I welcome Parul, and we can start from your question to begin with, please.
Thank you, sir. So, astronomy has always spiked an interest in people, even outside of the scientific community. We have seen books and movies that familiarize us with these fascinating objects and let us, at least virtually, visit other worlds outside our own.
Yes, astronomy, as you know, is the most ancient science and is very commonly known to the general public. In fact, wherever we go, we find so much of excitement among general public, whether you're meeting them in the airport or in the railway station or even just discussing randomly in gatherings. This has happened because a big part of it is obviously played by the popular science, which has helped reach new research and new science to people's doorstep. We do research intricately in the universities and institutes, but we have a responsibility of spreading this to general public. Fortunately, we have achieved that quite well in today's world. Regular television content, books and podcasts deliver scientific knowledge to the general public. There is also more science coverage by the media nowadays. We have also achieved a lot in the last couple of decades. For example, for this particular latest launch of James Webb Space Telescope, we have seen absolutely tremendous amount of response from general public who has nothing to do with astronomical research or anything like that. The spectacular images that James Webb Telescope have produced reminds me also of the Hubble Space Telescope, which first produced so deep, glamorous images, which actually made astronomy more glamorous and more, exciting to general public. We are very fortunate that we live in this age. We have now been able to see and observe universe in much greater detail, much have finer resolution, fidelity in the images which we are seeing right now from JWST. We have got some excellent resolution images of planets like Jupiter, galaxy clusters, star-forming regions, you name it. But while we celebrate our achievements, we also should remember that how everything began, how this all efforts have come together producing this great science which is now getting produced. We also remember the achievements of the great scientists who have worked the earth.
The scientific advances made in the past century have played a major role in kindling the research aptitude in astronomy. Though we know that astronomy is probably one of the oldest sciences, I wonder how it was done before we had access to the giant telescopes.
Yeah, as you know, it all began, the optical telescopes first were invented in 1609 AD with Galileo Galilei, using them to get the first images of the moon, the craters in the moon, the planets, and you know it. But before that, we didn't have the luxury of using a telescope. So there were a lot of things were done by something called a positional astronomy, which is also very popular nowadays. And we are using that to start off, as you know, the beginning classes of Introduction to Astronomy in the bachelor's level at IIT Indore. You remember this has linked to the using the location of stars, the planets to navigate, which was very popular and very useful to the sailors in the past. It basically forms a part of what we call celestial navigation. Even nowadays, although it was in the past, but I can just make a detour and say, even nowadays people are going back to relying on the same old techniques of celestial navigation to get accurate, informed, and not the information which cannot be tampered by other sources. We'll come to that later, maybe some other time in some other episodes. So, but astronomy actually started even before that. The earliest written records comes from as early as 1600 BC. You remember the Stonehenge in UK? It basically acts as a big calculating machine to observe and record the position of planets and the sun. We know that more than 1,000 years ago, the Chinese recorded astronomical events like a supernova, which is the explosive death of a star. There even have been shreds of evidence of carvings of star positions, and these are more than 30,000 years old. In this context, I should also mention that even the original inhabitants, like in Chaco Canyon in US, we find evidences of use of positional astronomy as early as 900 AD.
So clearly, astronomy has been a part of human conscience for ages. I wonder if it was always the science that drove people to record the astronomical events or make star charts?
I wouldn't claim it to be only science. We know that early men also believed that the heavens, or basically astronomical objects in the sky, held the power over earthly existence. This was the rise of, things like astrology, where they started making correlation between earthly calamities and astronomical occurrences, like predicting a disaster because of eclipses or good luck from meteor showers, etc., etc. This is known as the psychology of the unknown. We must also say that even the beliefs about ominous effects of eclipses were prevalent in India as well. And it took down to Aryabhat, who actually in as early as 500 AD, he actually shown clearly that these are actually heavenly events and nothing to do with any ominous events like Rahu or Ketu.
Coming back to the scientific aspect of positional astronomy, how was it done back then, especially without using any complicated instruments that we have now?
That's a very exciting question. We have some ideas from the relics of those times and written records of how people used to perform positional astronomy. About 2,700 years ago, people were able to use math and recorded data to predict eclipses. Given some more time, they were able to estimate the size of the Earth, Moon, Sun, and even distances between planets. About 2,300 years ago, Hipparchus, who was another philosopher, produced the first star catalogue and recorded the names of constellations. Obviously, much of this information was not widely spread across the general population due to absence of press and was limited to courts of the kings. A lot of this information was also regulated by sacred institutions. Even about 500 years ago, the fact that the earth goes around the sun was found absurd. And again, in this context, I should mention that we are fortunate to be in India, where the mathematician and astronomers of as early as Aryabhat, Brahmagupta or Varamir have actually propounded very, very early that this is the true. The earth revolves around the sun than contrary to the popular belief at that time.
It's incredible that our ancestors were able to understand the vastness of space 2,500 years ago. Where does the Indian subcontinent stand in this part of the history?
That's again a very, very nice question and very contextual to what we're discussing now. India, as you know, has a vast history of astronomy before the conventional astronomy that we see now began. In fact, the fact that we are in Indore and we are so close to Ujjain, one of the very old city of India, is that Ujjain has been a very big seat of learning, particularly in the context of astronomy in ancient India. We have proofs of people recording the different phases of the moon, which are close to 10,000 years old. There are different kinds of instruments found in the excavation of Harappan civilization. Even the Vedic literature mentions astronomy. The particular context of Vedanga Jyotisha exists, and it is very well documented nowadays. Within the last 2000 years, India had people like Aryabhat who sought astronomy as a science. As we discussed just before in the previous question, that he was the first one to document evidences and calculations for movement of different heavenly bodies, predict eclipse, and actually provide the basis of the calculation of time. There were two kind of system, Ardharatrika, and one based on the the dawn of the rise of the sun. The day begins with the rise of the sun, or it begins from the midnight hours. And both were actually prevalent from the time of Aryabhat. For in some context, only the one of them, which is the beginning of the day from the rising of the sun, that has become very popular in Indian system. The other one didn't remain that popular. So Aryabhat also figured out the motion of the earth on its axis around the sun, in contrast to many other people at the time who thought that the sun moved around the earth. There are ample sheds of evidence of ancient civilizations recording the motion of the sun, moon, and planets. Many ancient Indian philosophers have been known to study astronomy, and there have been written records of their work. However, we do not know what kind of instruments they must have used to accurately determine the astronomical events. Maybe they were destroyed or lost, but some of those instruments still remain. For example, by the medieval period, at the beginning of the 18th century, a new interest in astronomy was created by the efforts of Maharaja Sawai Jai Singh II of Jaipur, who was a skilled astronomer. He set up astronomical observatories in Jaipur, Delhi, Ujjain, Banaras, and Mathura, and they are popularly called as Jantar Mantar. He built giant instruments which stand till day to make accurate astronomical observations. We might wonder why Sawai Jai Singh made all those observatories, which are really marvels of civil engineering in the early 1700 AD. Actually, what happened, the context goes like this, that Sawai Jai Singh was following astronomical events, and the calculations of that particular age was not matching up with the actual events which were showing up. So the calculations were not able to predict correctly the new moon or the full moon occurrences. So he was compelled to go into this direction of creating the so-called modern day observatories for positional astronomy. And he started building these fantastic instruments in the following cities.
Wow, that is incredible. So, are these instruments at Jantar Mantar still in usable condition?
Yeah, actually they are. It is still a wonder. In fact, I came to know about a couple of them through Dr. Ratnashri Nandivara, the ex-director of Nehru Planetarium. Unfortunately, we lost her due to the COVID. And she was really excited about all these instruments. And she was actually instrumental in rejuvenating a couple of them, particularly in context of Delhi and Jaipur. Some of the instruments have been restored and can be used for scientific measurements of astronomical positions. In fact, through Ratnashri, I learned that they actually can become a part of the curriculum when we're teaching the positional astronomy. So the nearest one we have from Indore is Ujjain, and that is maintained by the Jivaji Vedshala, as you know. And we are trying to, kind of make a collaborative, event of try to use a few of them for, teaching positional astronomy in our undergraduate level course at IIT Indore. Even though many of the markings on the Jantar Mantar instruments in Delhi were missing, a functional restoration was done to allow public usage. These instruments in Delhi can be used to determine the local time and the reclination of angle of the sun. which basically gives an idea of how high the sun is in the sky at a given latitude on Earth. These instruments can also be used to find location of bright objects in the night sky. Basically, there are multiple instruments in Jantar Mantar. We can start with naming a few. It's difficult to describe all of them just verbally without any visual aid. So I will not try to do all of them, but try to see if some simpler instruments can be explained in detail. Now, you have visited Ayuka in Pune, right? So there was a big structure, looked like a horn of a bull or a cow, and that appeared very funny when I was also in my masters in Pune. But that is actually a kind of a model for something called Samrat Yantra, and those models actually belong to this Swai Jai Singh's enormous work of these observatories across India. So this is called Samrat Yantra, or it is basically an equal hour sundial. Now, you have seen sundial before, I'm sure, and a lot of other audiences definitely have seen sundial, because where kind of the shadow of the sun falls throughout the day, and you can actually divide the entire day or when the sun is up into equal hours, and you can measure the time based on that. Similarly, Samrat Yantra works basically on the same principles. It has two horn-like structures on two sides of a central building, which acts for two different parts of the day, and the shadow of the sun on each of them actually measures the time passing in the day. It has triangular wall pointing towards the North Pole, the pole star. There are arcs placed perpendicular to this triangular wall, and they are in the plane of the equator. Now, as the shadow of the triangular wall moves, we can estimate the time due to the sun moving in the sky. This is the basic clock, and the one in Jaipur actually is accurate up to 2 seconds. This is amazing. I mean, think about it. Today we are using smartwatches, we are using atomic clocks, we get millisecond precisions. But without use of any such advanced techniques, you get a precision of time measurement up to 2 seconds. Of course, that is only for Jaipur. The other Samrat Yantras are not as accurate, but the one in Ujjain I checked, it measures up to 20 seconds, give or take. That's the beauty of the Samrat Yantra, and it looks very majestic, and we should visit the nearest Jantar Mantar of wherever we are, and we should make use of this restorations of these instruments and learn from there. I will invite everybody to visit the nearest city, and please make a point to visit the nearest Jantar Mantar in next visit. Another instrument at the Jantar Mantar in Delhi is called Ramyantra, which can be used to determine the location of celestial objects. The location of any celestial object is determined in terms of altitude and azimuth. Altitude is the height of the object from the horizon, and azimuth is the angular distance from the North Star. So you can imagine that there is a two-dimensional system. So if you're looking from the horizon going up to the zenith, that is the angle you are making, and that determines your altitude. Whereas azimuth is, if you look at the North Star as the reference and you're moving away in a clockwise direction, you make an angle to the North Star, which is kind of an azimuth angle. And so azimuth will be going from 0 to full 360, and the altitude will be going from 0 to 90 degree. And that covers every point in the hemisphere which we can see above the horizon. So altitude is the height and the azimuth is the angular distance from the North Star. Both the quantities are measured in degrees. This is a cylindrical instrument built in a way such that it can determine the altitude and azimuth of the celestial objects up to an accuracy of 0.1 degrees or 1/10 of a degree. That's also very, very amazing, given that it is simply by the reflection or the shadow of the objects as observed on the ground. We are not using any optical instrument or any other sensors, detectors in other wavebands. And we are able to measure time up to 2 seconds and measure the accuracy of pointing an object up to 1/10 of a degree. To put it in context, if we fast track to current generation telescopes, we can probably measure objects up to few arcs of a second, which is 1 arc second is 1/3600th part of a degree. So, and this is 1/10. So we are not very far. But of course, the amount of technology, amount of progress which has been made to produce, and the cost produce those instruments which we're using now is enormous. So you can imagine if you go back about 500 years and you are doing these calculations back in 1700 AD, right? And you're still measuring at the precision time at the precision of 2 seconds and the positional accuracy at 0.1 degree, which is amazing. So coming back to discussing the Jantar Mantar, the third instrument which I think deserves special mention is this jantar called Jai Prakash. It is possibly the most elaborate and complex instrument that Swai Jai Singh made. It can be used to track the movements of the astronomical objects. It is a bowl-shaped instrument built partly above and partly below the ground level. It also used to actually translate the coordinate system from one system to the other, but more about it later. The interior surface is divided into segments, and there are steps between the segments for observations. There are more instruments we can discuss, like I think the most poster boy for Jantar Mantar appears, which most of us have seen, and maybe also on the stamps, is the Mishra Jantra in the Jantar Mantar of New Delhi. That is actually a amalgamation of different yantra that Swai Jai Singh did, and it definitely have Samrat Yantra and other ones, but it's not a single instrument as we have assumed.
So this was all about the instruments at Delhi, but you mentioned that Swai Jai Singh also made Jantar Mantar at other locations. So what other instruments are available at those sites?
Yeah, that's quite correct. Thanks for bringing it up. Delhi Observatory, actually, beside Delhi, Swai Jai Singh built observatories in the city of Jaipur, city of Varanasi, city of Ujjain, and Mathura. So if I just put it in context, if you see Delhi Observatory, it is about 28 degree 37 minutes north with a longitude of 77 degree 13 minutes east. Okay, as compared to that, Jaipur is at 26 degree 55 minutes north and 75 degree 49 minutes east. In Jaipur, we have most of the instruments which Delhi has, except this Mishra Jantra. That is not there in Jaipur. There is Ramyantra is found there, Jai Prakash Yantra. There is another instrument which is found very popularly called the Nari Varai Yantra. Now, what is the Nari Varai Yantra? Like similar to the, what you have to realize is that there are instruments which have similar capabilities, but depending on the time of the year, one instrument may be used more better than the other ones. A Nari Varai Yantra consists of basically two circular plates fixed permanently on a masonry stand of convenient height above the ground level. The plates are originally oriented parallel to the equatorial plane, and iron stiles of appropriate length pointing towards the poles, in this case the north poles, are fixed at the centers. The instrument Nari Varai, in fact, is an equal hour sundial, just like again the same as Samrat Yantra, built in two halves, indicating apparent solar time of the place. It's a very effective tool for demonstrating the passage of the sun across the celestial equator. On the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox, the rays of the sun fall parallel to the two opposing faces of the plates and illuminate both of them. However, at any other time, only one of the faces remains towards the sun. After the sun has crossed the equator around March 21st, its rays illuminate the northern face for 6 months. After September 21st, it is the southern face that receives the rays of the sun. So basically, depending on the time of the year, you can use different halves of this Nadivalai Jantra. So this Nadivalai is one of the another instrument which is found in Jaipur Observatory also. If you see the timeline of the observatories being created, you can also see that the first one, which was built by Swai Jai Singh, actually was from 1721 to 1724. Okay, and then a bigger one, which is built in Jaipur, between 1728 to 1734. And then followed by the other three, Mathura, Ujjain and Varanasi, between 1723 and 34. Okay. In fact, there is a documented evidence from a writer that Swai Jai Singh was so passionate about building this observatories that actually he made wax models of each of the instruments first before actually went ahead and made the masonries to actually create these instruments. So he first made the Delhi Observatory. So the Delhi Observatory comes obviously in the beginning of our discussion. And after that he went to Jaipur, then Mathura, Ujjain, Varanasi. So entire work of all these 5 observatories were completed between 1721 and 1734. That's quite amazing. So definitely, as we come to the context, Jaipur is a marvel of Jai Singh's creation. Of course, it's a capital city where he ruled. And the motivation for creating these observatories comes from the fact that Swai Jai Singh was actually perturbed with this inaccuracy in predicting the different heavenly celestial events like the new moon and the full moon by the existing tables. So he did a lot of work and documented all these evidences, and the tables were formed. So Jaipur Observatory is mostly valued because it has the most number of instruments. It is the not only Ramyantra, Jai Prakash Yantra, Nadi Valai or Samrat Yantra, but there are various other, total 16 instruments were there in this particular observatory by masonry instrument. And there were few metallic instruments, there about total in 6 in numbers were installed in this particular observatory. So Jaipur Observatory was also renovated, and I think it is now of great use. We probably visited during one of the ASI conferences there, and it has quite a lot of use now, as we can see.
Thank you so much for this very insightful session and for encouraging astronomers like me and young minds to come and explore the space. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Parul, for asking those questions. And these are not only relevant for you, but also relevant for a lot of audiences, I'm pretty sure. I'm sure there will be a lot more questions remains unanswered. The discussion we have today will give rise to another set of questions, and we will again come again on air to discuss them at a relevant time. Thanks for listening.
Ancient Indian Observatories. You heard the 47th episode of our all-new series on traditional Indian knowledge systems, Power of Listening. The expert on the show was Dr. Abhirup Datta, Professor of Astrophysics, IIT Indore, an Indologist. Talking to him was Parul Jangal, an Indologist pursuing PhD. We hope you enjoyed the first part of this program. This program was produced by Brahma Prakash Chaturvedi and Vinod Kumar. Special thanks to AIR Indore and Randheer Thakur for their contributions. This episode is also available on our official YouTube channel, Akashvani AIR. Be there on the 26th of August, same time, same frequencies, for the second and the concluding part of this program. This is Manoj Mainkar signing off from Delhi. Bye for now.